All? Yep. Nope. Nope. That's all we can afford, I guess.
Okay, so we're going to have 4 topics. I'm going to posit it to the panel. You guys can answer them in any order. Please argue with each other if you want to watch. For the sake of brevity, we'll ask questions at the end. Okay, so the first question topic, can you introduce yourselves?
Yeah.
And talk about where you work and kind of what you're working on right now.
Sure. So my name is Jason Fuller. I'm the Executive Director of Cloud Service Delivery, Cengage Learning here. Someday Academy said, hey, can you host a meetup for DevOps? I said, sure. I joined in January. I'm currently taking our global data center and trying to sell everything that I can out of it and move it to Amazon Web Services. So that's what I'm
Hi everyone, my name is Mike Draper. I'm a principal architect with Cloud Technology Partners. I've had the good fortune to work in the tech industry for over 30 years. Half I spent in working for ISVs, positions from software engineering to professional services. The other half in IT, both from the standpoint of positions from director of development all the way up to chief operating officer. So I've sat on both sides of the table, both as a consumer of services and a provider of services. Right now my focus with Cloud Technology Partners, I work with Fortune 500 companies, help them transition to the cloud, both from the standpoint of strategy and operations. And I've had the good opportunity to work with Jason here. Also, just as a side note, I know everyone is here because they want to be able to maintain and improve their skills in the area of DevOps and manage their career. And so I wanted to bring something to help everyone move along. And I was reading a resume, a want ad for a senior DevOps engineer, and looking at the criteria, and one of the criteria was must own 3 more Nerf guns. So we do have a raffle here. Please make sure that you drop your name in the container at the end, and we'll pull the winner, and we can help them move along.
Wait till it gets to you.
My name is Matt. I'm the founder of a company called BitLancer. We do software as a service. It's platform as a service, and it's basically Puppet as a service. It's targeted more towards legacy type customers that want to take advantage of the cloud but can't totally change their mindset right away. So we have a lot of experience with sort of talking to organizations about converting to a DevOps type mindset and going through the whole process of hiring DevOps engineers, which we always obviously try to frown upon. And then also we do consulting as well. I also am an indoor cycling instructor, so a little in Back Bay. So figured I'd throw that in there to match up with your
Back Bay.
yeah. Good line.
Health club's going up.
Like the core, you know, orange.
I'm Peter. I'm a senior systems engineer. Work for a digital advertising agency called Huge in Brooklyn. We're not quite huge, but we're pretty big. But myself and a colleague were both hired about a little over a year ago in order to help the organization, evolve into, a more agile, DevOps-y, less waterfall-y type of organization. But I've worked sort of all over the map in terms of different verticals. I've worked in e-commerce and media delivery and e-learning, all sorts of different things. But I'm really passionate about getting people working together, sitting together, talking to one another, and communicating with one another. And that's sort of what drew me into the whole DevOps world.
Tobias. I currently work at Scout Exchange. We sort of provide a service marketplace for getting companies and recruiters together to help get candidates placed faster. Software engineer there, though I've also been doing a lot of work helping with their ops infrastructure, trying to really raise awareness of the fact that they actually need to have an ops infrastructure, and doing some of the work there. We've also worked in systems administration, technical product management. I also have a side business doing consulting, so I've got a pretty broad range of experiences. Yeah.
Okay. So our first topic is kind of a multi-part question. Just tell me if you want me to repeat it. What problems are you trying to solve with moving to DevOps? How are the decisions around DevOps made? And what is the process and discussions look like from a personnel and training and tools perspective?
All right, maybe I'll jump in first. Yeah, someone who's smack in the middle of doing many of these things. So, I don't have all of the history around why myself and a colleague were brought in and a number of other people within the organization to sort of help change this. But the sort of larger things are software quality, smaller batch sizes, faster development, all of the sorts of things around, modern agile software development, lean, Scrum, Kanban, whatever. And this was an organization that was, very, very waterfall-like. I like to refer to it as being more agile now, where exactly, So we've had a lot of transformations. The organization is slowly emerging into a faster, more agile, higher velocity software development shop. So generally, those are the sorts of things that we're trying to solve. We're trying to become a modern software development group. So, in terms of how the process works for that, it's really twofold. There's, the sort of executive leadership is there to provide, the sort of broad roadmap for where the organization wants to go. So, planting flags in the ground, like, by the end of this year, we'll be practicing continuous delivery. For example, end in truth. So, the executive leadership is responsible for providing that sort of detail, but it becomes very egalitarian after that. So we do have a very close-knit group of developers that are actually spread across many different locations, but the decisions about technologies, how things are going to get done, tooling, all of those sorts of things are entirely up for grabs. Then my first 2 months at the job, we rolled out AWS to the entire organization, previously relying on IT in order to spin up instances, and chef automation, Jenkins across the board, introduced a whole bunch of different deployment frameworks, and a whole bunch of that stuff stuck, and a whole bunch of it failed, and we then started refactoring and sort of iterating over our process, and by having a very egalitarian and open communication within technology as a whole at the organization, we're able to recover from short-sighted decisions, or just straight up bad decisions, or mistakes that we make. What was the final part, or if I had more or less covered and talked enough of that?
I think you got it.
Yeah, so at Scout, I just got hired on about 3 months ago, and ostensibly we're an agile shop. We do Scrum meetings every morning, but it's, we run 2-week sprints, but we don't do releases. We have about a 2.5 month release cycle, which is just insanity. And it introduces a lot of issues because as you go along, you forget about what you were doing in the first sprint, and probably about 80 or 90% of our QA is pretty much manual. So we're working on trying to automate that. It is a little difficult because of the fact that we're integrated into both hiring and search firm ATSs. So a lot of our QA, we have to actually log into those systems to be able to get a good end-to-end view of how the data flows. So I've been trying to raise a bit more awareness both within the team and in management as to how we can actually reduce some of those cycles and improve throughput. So when I got hired on, so we're sort of in a weird position where we are a startup, but we're also sort of a sister/child company of a larger company, and so we're using a lot of their services both on HR and on IT. So right now we're trying to distance ourselves from their IT team and separate ourselves out so that we can manage things on our own. We are running an AWS, but we're doing it very statically. So we have 9 hosts, and that's how it is. We're not really able currently to easily spin up new infrastructure because everything is very statically defined of, this one talks specifically to this host by name. When I started up, all we had for being able to manage those systems is a bunch of Puppet scripts that were run standalone. So you had to SSH into every box, execute the Puppet script, wait for it to complete. Hopefully it went right. And that's all tied together with some Fabric scripts. So I've got us all moving towards using SaltStack for doing both the configuration management and the orchestration, so that we can get rid of both of those tools and have it in one unified location. We're just barely starting to do that. And currently our ops team is one very junior person. Went from QA to ops. She's been doing ops for maybe a little under 6 months now. So I'm trying to lend my expertise to point her in the right directions, and also just raise awareness in the entire team of these are some of the right ways to do things. So we have continuous integration through Jenkins, and actually our build slave completely died the other day, so we spent the day rebuilding it manually to get a build going for our release this week. That was fun. But there's also a lot of politics involved, particularly because we are trying to distance ourselves from the IT organization of our parent/sister company. So all of our current AWS infrastructure that's running in production is under their account, so we have limited access to that. We do have our own account that we've been using for some staging and testing, just for trying to get our system built. So we're finally at a point where we can reliably build the systems, albeit with standalone Puppet scripts, trying to move that into SaltStack, and all new systems are being built in SaltStack. Which, by the way, if you haven't checked it out, do yourself a favor and at least look at it. It has a lot of really good, interesting ideas and capabilities. And there's also some weird bottlenecks in terms of our management infrastructure where it seems to be very much top-down. We're all trying to fix that, but a lot of the feature work is just, this is the feature we want, this is how you're going to do it, go and do it, rather than having any sort of real collaboration between the engineering team and the business team to say, what is the best way to get where we need to be. We have been making some movement with that, but so far it's been a slow road. I don't know if there are any pieces that I left out of the question.
I think that's good.
Yeah, so we've got the opposite problem, I think, if we need that. How many people are at Scout?
On the engineering team, we've got probably about 10 people, 10 or 12 people, and then QA another 6 or so.
So I'll talk
So
about
Cengage is a little bigger.
So I'll talk about the other side of the spectrum. I've got 6,000 thousands of servers that run in VMware that we have an all-you-can-eat Oracle license. We can chew up as much VMware as I want. Those problems I appreciate the startup, but what I have is guys like you who want to go off and change the world who can right now because there's no wrappers around it, right? So my development teams are very talented, but they're also very used to focusing on their world, what they want, when they want it. I want to use Liquibase. I don't want to use something else. I want to use Chef. I want to use Puppet. I want to use SaltStack. So one of the challenges I have with our chief software architect is as we bring the entire organization to a SOA-based architecture, which we're not today. We're we're running about 17 petabytes of a data center in a very siloed fashion, is opening up to the idea that we have to give controlled guidance into the development community so that they can, a guy 6 layers down from my role can actually see the vision and achieve the vision, but do it in a way that he feels somewhat responsible for the creative outcome of what he's trying to get done. So, unlike the planting of the flags, which is more my management team, managers beneath my director's job, as an executive, I've got 2 challenges. I have a $17 million overrun, which I'm going to find in empty FTEs that nobody's filling because guys like Dave don't exist in some capacity to help get filled. So I have to close those FTEs off. And teams are going to lose stuff that have been open for 9 months or 12 months because they can't find the Uber DevOps guy that they're looking for. And unfortunately, you look at that and go, I'd rather promote jobs than take jobs away, but I get a $17 million overrun. So 6,000 person company, there's a lot of savings in finding FTEs that are because, well, I need a DBA. Well, yeah, cool, everybody needs a DBA, but they're wicked expensive. And can't you give that over to that guy who understands database versioning and Mongo, and that's good enough? So you have to kind of sometimes be the big parent in the room and lay out the dollars for where they are. But ultimately, the vision I set forth is you have 3 things. You have customer satisfaction driving your metrics. So, if Scott, for example, worked for me in DevOps, Scott's whole job, all the goals that I care about him meeting are based on customer satisfaction. His customer is the developer. So he's not a developer. He's in operations. The second is everything is automated. So I don't particularly care which system you use, which tool you use, but you have to automate. There's nothing manual allowed. And then the third is you have to basically play you have to basically take into account the fact that you can't be dependent upon for the final product and deliverable for that development team. So the problems I'm trying to avoid by doing that as the executive vision is I'm trying to avoid I play on the same team as that team every time and I love the product and I never want to work anywhere else. And so therefore I only learn their DevOps roadmap, which may be Jenkins to Nexus to RPMs to Rundeck to Puppet to AWS. Maybe some variation north-south of any of those things in their application and operation build cycle. And I will avoid the other problem, which is I'm the hated, dreaded operations guy who is always up at 2 a.m. doing every release, and I hate my job and I want to quit, right? So those 2 ends of the spectrum really exist all over the place. I have to find some balance. So giving that DevOps vision allows for teams to self-elect people who say, I'm more operationally focused. I really do feel like I'm your kind of ops guy. I want to be that ops guy. And we draw them into a center of excellence where you direct report into the cloud operations team. And you are allowed to go out and teach development teams how to be independent. But we have to, as an organization, change. I think, and we've talked about that the first time we met, is the organizational changes. A lot of big companies like mine are fully idle-baked. I mean, we bought in hook, line, and sinker in 1982 when Margaret Thatcher stood up and said, damn it, a chair's a chair. And DevOps is developers operating. And it's kind of like giving the scalpel to the driver of the cab that you came to the hospital in. You kind of go, holy shit, I'm ready for that. But developers are intelligent, they're extremely creative, and they're extremely motivated, especially as I've talked to Dave about when you have a lot of them swimming in the same direction. Operations guys in my organization are dinosaurs, 15 years average tenure. Never want to leave the data center. Get scared to death when I start talking about not buying Sun servers anymore. Cry a little bit at home when I tell them that we're not going to get Red Hat's subscription on your stuff down there anymore. And you have to kind of fake the whole hybrid thing because it's what keeps people employed. But we're not going to be hybrid. We're going to be cloud. But yeah, the DevOps really it's a religion. It's a paradigm shift. And so in an organization like mine, you have to focus on kind of that bigger picture. So hiring DevOps is really difficult because everybody has an idea of the person that they really want on their team. What I need is somebody who can come in and actually drive transformation, build a developer who's smarter, more intelligent, and then an operations team who's also more lenient and open to the idea that I can I can version a database. I am able to, as a developer, version a database. It is possible to version a database. And even though we have an all-you-can-eat Oracle, nobody wants to use it. So it kind of
Transfer it
waste.
to me.
Yeah. But and outsourcing is another big thing. As a company in the education space, there's not been a lot of outsourcing. I'm not outsourcing, but I am right sourcing. So where I have India operations through a company called SmartShift Technologies, Scott knows work for SmartShift. We're finding a really good 24/7 NOC to do our CloudFormation support, right? And we're doing all of our puppet builds, and our digital library has 100 stacks, and the developers are going to be able to consume that through automated tooling and API-driven messaging and Swagger and all that cool jazz. And so that's kind of where we fall. Dollars have to come first. But it's a cool time to be around.
Yeah, and I see the same common themes across the marketplace. Themes like you talk to clients and say, you know what, we finally realized that managing the data center is not our core competence here. We want out. Right? And you're talking about companies like GE, Fortune 10, Fortune 20 companies that say, okay, we want to focus on our core business. The other shift that we're seeing is the technology budget is shifting to the line of business. Right? It really gives a squat about technology. They're focused on their customer and growing the top line. So they want to know, how do I shrink time to market for the next release? All right, I don't want to wait that long. Can you cut it in half? Or how can I get 20% more releases per year? How do I reduce my cycle times? I don't care how you do it. Just help me put together a plan. So reducing time to market, increasing number of releases that you can get out per cycle are some of the key themes. Getting out of the data center is a key theme. And depending upon where you are, size of the company, that necessity is the mother of invention, right? If you're a startup, you have no choice but to embrace some of the themes that you talk about in the area of DevOps, because it's you and your colleague. You have to do it all. When you get into the enterprise, who have been there, as Jason said, for 15 years, and you know what? I set up storage, then I push this button, and I call Fred, and he does the network, and once he's all done, then he pushes the button and throws it over to the data import guys, and that's their world, and it's the law of physics. The body at rest tends to stay at rest. The body in motion tends to stay in motion. And getting a large enterprise to move, make a paradigm shift, is a tremendous challenge. Now, with that said, there's if you're out looking for your next step, there's all sorts of pluses for working in an enterprise, a large company, and there's all sorts of pluses, for working in a small startup. They both have a lot to offer. Don't discount it. But from the standpoint of themes, it's getting out of the data center is a theme. Decreasing the cycle times. How can I get more releases out per year, and how can I shrink time to market for the next product that gets out the door, and pick any technology you want, but make it happen. And oh, by the way, shrink your budget, operating budget by a couple points too, while you're doing that. So those are all themes that are pretty much common, that we see across the marketplace.
I have a few things to say. Trying to limit myself and filter myself here, otherwise I'll talk for half an hour. But I guess going on some of the things that Dave was talking about, looking at what DevOps is to me right now, and what I see organizations calling DevOps and what their goals are with DevOps, I really like to take it back in time a little bit, say 5, 6, 7 years ago, to why DevOps came around to begin with. And I really feel like there's two different types of organizations. There's the organizations that went to DevOps without even necessarily knowing that they went to DevOps. They went there because they needed to. It was their natural progression. And then there's the organizations where like they're out hiring a DevOps engineer because they just need DevOps and they know they need DevOps, and so like one of the things that I try to focus on is like kind of like what you mentioned. You had linked to that Puppet presentation. Actually, I haven't read it yet. I just noticed on the slide, but I'll take a look later. Where it's like about building DevOps teams internally, and like instead of actually hiring a DevOps engineer. And I can't even tell you, like a lot of our clients that we've talked to, or just experience, or even consulting that we've done, they're like they have a posting for a DevOps engineer, or one guy that's kind of supposed to come in and be like transform our ways and make us DevOps. And so that one guy sits there and like starts banging out some chef cookbooks and like, okay, well this is automated, and the developers are still not changing their mindsets at all. And like people forget that it's a huge mindset shift, and like. And we see some organizations try to take that huge mindset shift all at once. We did a data center migration last year where we went to this huge nonprofit. It's very well known. I can't say the name, but we moved them out of a data center and into the public cloud. And there were a lot of requirements around it. And at that point, it was about they wanted to go from A to Z right away. It's like we're in this legacy mindset. Let's go to the latest and greatest. And it's about asking why. What are their pain points? So I think the biggest thing with what I say, or what I think about goals with DevOps is going back to like 2009 when you had traditional data centers with dedicated servers. People had servers at Rackspace or wherever they had those physical servers. When they wanted a new server, it took 3 weeks. And meanwhile, the developers just wanted to keep pushing code. And then Amazon came around, and the introduction of virtualization, and also the ability for them to say, let me spin up a server. And I can remember I did this huge consulting job back in 2010 where I literally took 1,000 instances. They were all different operating systems. There were 1,000 servers running in Amazon public cloud, all manually configured, not EBS backed. Spent like 40 hours a week just rebuilding instances that had died. And it's just because they were treating them like traditional servers. They were treating them as persistent servers. And I have a couple blog posts out there about ephemeral versus persistent cloud and when you want to use one versus the other if you guys have any interest. But literally, like the reason they were doing that though is because it kept them moving fast. The business goals were like, I want to push faster. I have business goals to meet, and I need to get my code out there, and this allows me to do that. And I think where we're moving to with DevOps is that a later question, or should I? Okay. We're gonna finish. And he's like, where are you moving to with DevOps? We're moving to with DevOps is essentially full stack development, right? Where I'm sure everybody's heard of containers and Docker and the ability to say, okay, if you're developing and architecting, you're an engineer that's working from the top to the bottom, and that's why it's so important to have your dev team. Everybody doesn't have to be full stack now. Like things are still in a legacy type mindset of, I feel like no matter what your organization is, how far along the path you are, you're still kind of treating your infrastructure a little bit separately than you are your code. But DevOps to me is about two things. It's about treating your infrastructure like you would your code. So even if it's a separate process, even if your chef cookbooks or your Puppet recipes or your Puppet modules live completely separate from your application code, at least you're treating the infrastructure the same way that you treat your software project, because you can. There's APIs to spin up servers now instead of having to have some guy rack a server in a data center. And then also just about these two teams sort of merging and working together. And that was a natural progression, right? And that's what I mentioned. So I think those are the two things to me, and I think it's just most important. The biggest thing I took out of your presentation was to just not be hiring this one guy. It drives me crazy, hiring this one guy to come in and do all the work and then leave. Because then you have the problem of, I get it all the time where we get calls from people that are like, well, I had this guy come in and implement Chef, but then we had this other guy come in and say he didn't like Chef, so he implemented Salt, and so now we have some stuff in Salt, some stuff in Chef, and we want to move to Puppet. And I don't, and I don't know if you guys have seen, I don't know if I can say a bad word with recording, but there's the new justfuckingshellscripts.org. Has anybody seen it? And it's things have gotten so complicated, a lot of these tools have gotten so bloated and there's such a large learning curve that it's almost a regression back to, okay, shell scripting might work for something like this, and a lot of organizations are just doing that. And I don't know Salt very well. It's the one configuration management tool I haven't worked with. But from what I understand, that's kind of the simplicity of it, right?
Yeah.
Is that it's YAML, right?
Yeah, YAML with some Ginger template.
And so it's kind of moving backwards a little bit too. We have this huge abstraction, and now let's simplify things a little bit. But again, biggest recommendation I can give, just based on the companies we've talked to and how they're trying to define DevOps, is about treating their infrastructure like they do their product, and eventually those things will merge. As we move further and further towards Docker and containers and more ephemeral cloud instances. I think the biggest thing is that the technologists have to get there. Imagine you can't really spin up and spin down MySQL. It just doesn't work very well. I mean, you
No,
can,
that's a well.
but you know, it's a single point of failure. You
Yeah.
can try if you want.
You might lose a few records.
Yeah. Yeah. But you know, the distributed databases, all your technology is being cloud aware. I mean, we're gonna get there. And just in the meantime, you know, like just because your infrastructure is a separate project from your code, your engineers should be well invested in both and well vested in both. And one of the best recommendations I can give if you're an organization that's looking to do that sort of DevOps kind of thing is if you do have that one guy that's like that knows it, find a way to spend like 6 weeks and only focus on infrastructure. And so one of the
That's what I'm trying to do.
yeah, just but have your whole entire engineering team focus on it. So if you've got 5, 6, 7 people and they're all off working on their own projects, if you can spare the cycles, get them all in a room, like around a table, and say, we're gonna make this. We're gonna make some transformations, and like don't try to change everything at once. Don't do an organization that tried to do like an SVN to Git migration at the same time they were doing a data center to cloud migration at the same time they were trying to move all their stuff to SaaS, and it's like it exploded. You can't make that many changes. But everybody needs to be vested. You don't want this one guy in the corner that's kind of working on this stuff, and then engineers aren't really changing their mindset, because DevOps is about that mindset shift too. It's about understanding like how to move faster, and just you know, I already mentioned everything. But one other thing I wanted to say, and then I'll shut up, is I recently wrote a blog post, and I won't go into it in detail, but it's on my personal blog called "The Comparisons Between DevOps and Anxious People," and I highly recommend you read it. It's essentially comparing like, and I'm an OCD person, so I can talk about OCD people, but it's essentially like comparing an OCD person and how they operate and how they make themselves feel better to DevOps and automation and how that allows engineers to move faster. And so you should definitely check it out.
Yeah, drop a link in the meetup.
I will.
Okay, second topic. How do you measure success in your DevOps organization? Do you have specific metrics that you keep track of? How do you make sure that everybody's aligned with the same goals? And why do you think there's not a universal metric system for DevOps? How am I doing good at DevOps?
Well, I think jumping to the last point first as to why there isn't a universal metric system is because there's so bloody many ways that you can do it. So it's really one of those things where there is no one size fits all. Like DevOps means different things to different people, and also just there's even just from the automation perspective, there's so many different ways to do it. You can just use fucking shell scripts. Or you can use SaltStack and have everything be asynchronous and reactive, or you can use Chef or Puppet and have everything be, poll based of, I'm going to push up this new change, and then at some point something will happen on these servers, or, you can do it with Fabric, where you can just SSH in and do it. Right, exactly. Salt actually just released Salt SSH, so basically they can be Ansible if you really want them to. But just having all those different approaches makes it difficult to have a single measuring stick across all of them. But even from an organizational perspective, there are no two organizations that are the same. So every organization is going to have to take the bits that work for them and run with it. So again, having a single measuring stick is not really feasible. I'm sure that there could be some sort of abstractions that could be pulled out of successes of, do your devs talk to your ops teams on a regular basis? If not, then you're probably doing something wrong.
I think that's pretty much the Puppet report, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Dustin and I talked a little bit about this, and I think it's a lack of maturity, but it's, for an organization my size, I have to meet certain audits because I have to sell my products, and my products are being sold to companies that care about audits. So I have to define a process, and I have to show that I follow that process. It's just part of the game that we play. And I would actually argue that DevOps should be measured the same way development, because it's code in the end. So if you're good at coding, then you've got velocities, you've got heat mappings, you've got agile, you've got all sorts of other, how many actual stored points are we hitting, what's our workload look like, how efficient are my resources in terms of development, and you're just forcing them to be automation and operations first, right? The really hard one, and I've met with guys at Amazon, I've met with guys at Google, I've tried to figure out how you get your arms around this, is you also have to talk about the security side of things too.
Yes.
So how do you take a developer who wants to be wild and free and naked running through a field and tell them, nope, there's clothes, there's streets, there's laws. You can't do that. But I can. Look, I've got all these great tools, and I've got Docker, and I can do this, and yeah, okay, fine. I'm using Arango. Okay, but production hasn't seen Arango for long enough, so there's nobody out there that I can hire that's proven that it works on the scale that I need it to work on, right? So there's some of that catching up to do that the organizations your size will get to, and I honestly think that the enterprises are in dire straits. I mean, I personally believe the Fortune 500 will be totally turned over in the next 10 years, simply because we can't change, and we can buy you. But that doesn't really fix the problem, right? I mean, you buy for people, you buy for good reasons in your product line, but yeah, Google might buy me, but I'm not gonna. It doesn't make Google better. You kind of figure what's Google doing, but I think that's the biggest thing. So if developers can get their arms around, I'm actually able to do everything. You're doing creative development. I mean, you look at some of the CloudFormation stuff that we've done, Puppet, Chef, whatever you're using, Salt. You can be just as naked running through a field, but now you're inside of a pen, and I can audit you.
You can apply your same code review process to all of that.
Yeah.
To the same point, you're treating your infrastructure as code just as the rest of your application, right? So by applying the same processes, the same methodology, having everyone working together, but treating everything the same, you reach that egalitarian bliss, right? Everyone's super happy because you're pushing code.
You do have to standardize a bit, otherwise you get the fragility of non-standard, right? And as you grow, you can't just say, well, these guys over here want to use Chef and these guys want to use Puppet, because then you get locked into your platform plays, with the right scales of the world to say, oh yeah, do it all on us. You just make cats around templates, and you'll just be kitty cats and be happy, and pay us forever. And that's BS. Like, you should be able to do it as an organization on your own. Why have a middleman? Work direct with AWS, work direct with Google, whoever you can work with. And yeah, absolutely.
There are definitely organizations out there using Chef in their dev environments and Puppet in their prod environments because their dev and their prod teams are still completely separate, so they're each implementing DevOps in their own way. I've definitely seen that.
Old terms coming back around too. Like we're looking at making our fully automated move to a fully abstracted, fully SOA-based automated system that hopefully we'll be presenting at reInvent. But I'm hiring a digital media librarian, and I happen to work for a book company. So everybody knows what a librarian is, and everybody kind of goes, so Little House on the Prairie, dress, like, pops into your head. And you go, yeah, exactly, because that, Mama Hen is going to make sure that you don't check in any bullshit backdoor crap on my Puppet, pop repo.
Right.
Sorry, I got to have that old school cranky ass guy to make sure you beat back the production, guys who are going to break this. And so you do, kind of all comes around. I think you were trying to get to that. It's kind of it's retroactive.
One challenge that I've kind of come across, at least in my own case, for being able to treat your infrastructure in the same way that you treat your code is that there seems to be somewhat of a scarcity in terms of unit test ability, because we want to treat infrastructure and code as the same thing, but they are still fundamentally separate, at least for the time being. Like how do I actually unit test this? I mean, there are some frameworks out there like Server Spec, Test Kitchen, but basically those are the only two that I'm really aware of off the top of my head. Like there hasn't really been a proliferation of how do I actually test this. Yeah, most of what I've seen is just spin it up in a vagrant and then make sure it looks okay. So
yeah, I suck about writing tests for my Chef configurations.
So I mean that's definitely one thing that I'm working on pushing as we do move to implementing new things with Salt is we really need to set up a proper infrastructure for managing this appropriately so that we can see, oh shit, this stuff is broken. Otherwise,
you need some guardrails, right?
Exactly.
There are some, like we've been talking about, there are, boundaries to, certain choices that are going to be made within an organization. Some of them for us were, deciding, okay, well, we're going to use Chef, and we're going to teach everyone in the organization how to write Chef. Regardless of whether you had experience with Puppet or you had experience with Ansible, it's just a organizational decision, and happened to be one that I was on board with and was proselytizing to everyone. But there are some of those decisions. Not everything is a kumbaya opportunity, but you try to give people as much flexibility as possible to explore new things, but you try to take away as many of the sharp edges as possible, because there's lots of opportunities with many of the tools that we're all talking about where in one fell swoop you can shoot both of your legs. And that's part of the sort of older operational background that I have is you try to take some of those sharp edges away. Like, you don't take them all away. Like, go ahead, you can stab yourself, but I'm not going to give you the chance to saw your leg off.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing, not even so much in the tooling, as far as going back to the testability of infrastructure, is just there seems to be there hasn't really evolved a set of best practices of how to really manage to make sure, at least that I'm aware of, to make sure that things are all sane.
I'm just going to say best practices are bullshit.
Yeah, well, I use that term very loosely, but generally accepted practices.
Yes,
I guess.
okay.
One conversation I was having with one of my coworkers the other day about that was we were looking at server spec versus there's somebody sort of adapted Test Kitchen to sort of work with Salt.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And looking at it, I was realizing, we could probably get away with, really what you care about is you build it, and then you need to be able to check for things that are to say, does Nginx exist? Can I grab the config file and find these, these different elements? And really, you don't need a testing infrastructure for that. I mean, you can just use whatever your unit testing tool is of your language of choice and write unit tests, and then you just need to have some way of executing it on the host. So you write your unit test and you attach it to some sort of SSH framework, like Fabric or SSH and Ruby.
A lot of the slowdowns too are just, with infrastructure versus code, is that infrastructure there's still a big bottleneck with regards to spinning up infrastructure
Yes.
fast. If you're, Docker and like LXC with containers, I won't leave Docker out of the mix, just containers in general, which have been around for 30 plus years, but finally people are realizing how awesome they are like trying to solve that, and it's just, there's still a lot of bugs to work out. One of my clients was trying to switch over to that and would have been able to run their tests in under 4, 5, 6 seconds in certain cases, and there's just too many bugs at this point that they had to go back to virtual machines, which even on a local laptop still take a while to spin up. So those tests take a long time to run, and if you're trying to iterate over like again and again on something, and finally it can take hours to fix a problem. Whereas in normal code, where you can run those tests quickly, it might take much less time.
Yeah, right.
And to kind of go on this question, I think like a lot of the reasons why there's no specific standards around DevOps, like yes, it means a lot to different people, but it's also about like how important, like how DevOps is improving an organization. And if like a company to me is like, we're going to implement DevOps and then test it and see how well we're doing, to me that's almost backwards. I don't know how to phrase it exactly, but an organization like should be having somewhat of a pain point, like acknowledging the fact that they need the things that DevOps can solve. And I think like you were saying, there's a lot of organizations that are very, I don't want to say legacy, like Fortune 500, lots of
Traditional.
very careful here.
Fortune 500 enterprise.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of them are enterprise.
Enterprise, thank you. That was the word I was looking for.
Enterprise.
Where there's like SOX compliance and there's PCI compliance involved, and there's just so many different audits, and it's like moving slow is done on purpose. It's not because it's necessarily a large organization. There are large organizations out there that are still considered startups and move fast. They have 500, 1,000 employees. Lots and lots of developers can still find a way to move fast, just because a lot of it is around the fact that they don't necessarily have all these requirements. It all depends on what their product is. And I mean, like, how do you measure success in business? I don't have a business degree, but like I know if you were to look at 10 different companies, it'd be very hard to apply the same rules of success to each of them. And there's like that net promoter score thing, which I think everybody does. Again, I'm not a business person, and so maybe that's like, okay, we have a, you know, this company's net promoter score is this company's net promoter score is this, but other than that, like I don't really know of like specific standards you can look at a company and say, are they you know, successful and have they reached their goals? There are companies out there that are probably breaking even, but doing well in the world and are doing, you know, fighting for a good cause or something, and so therefore they consider themselves successful. So I think also just the tools need to mature. I think that's the biggest thing. I think you mentioned that comment. They're just so mature at this point. There are, last I checked, 347 different ways to implement Chef. And like Puppet is probably
It's
like
probably more by now.
250, and you know, it's there's
Also,
just
Chef changes their mind every 3 months.
Chef changes their mind every 3 months, roles, no roles, and I mean if you look at if you go on Freenode,
Talking about best practices.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you go on IRC and stay in the Freenode Chef channel, 95% of the conversation is all about how this person's doing this wrong, or you should be doing this, or you shouldn't be doing this, and so I think it's just all this stuff is so immature at this point, and you know, it's just because organizations have different needs, and so that's why there are so many different ways to build things, and so it's really hard to standardize on best practices and standardize on like one specific metric.
Well, and just the way that we're building these applications and building infrastructure is really, really new by the measure of any other sort of, you know, profession. Stuff is brand spanking new. So of course, you know, we're not going to have a singular idea about, you know, how we go about doing this. Like, look at medicine, you know, and there's tons of, you know, disagreement. You go to 2 different specialists and they look at the same information and still will come to different conclusions, and that's arguably a far more mature profession than what we're all engaged in.
Yeah. And I think also like you look at an organization, even if you know you're on the same playing field, same industry, right? If you're coming from an organization that's using a bunch of Oracle servers, for instance, and you're looking at other organizations that's using Redis or you know different. Let me try Mongo. I mean just the. I know. Sorry.
One person likes their data.
just the different technology stack alone,
Right.
completely changes how you're going to implement your infrastructure. Just because you know a lot of these technologies were built as you know in a single point of failure type mindset where they're not self-healing, and it's hard to automate that sometimes. And so you know I feel the pain of an organization that's using a ton of Oracle server. I mean I know there's Oracle Rack and things like that, but I you know maybe MySQL's a better example. But just you know the technology stacks themselves even matter, not even necessarily what the business is about or what your processes are.
I mean, our problem is that I have to be able to produce a solution. Yeah, there's Facebooks and there's you know Twitters in the world that may you know if you measure monetary value, maybe they're not there, but from a size perspective, or from the product's adoption or users or whatever metric you want to use. But yeah, I got this argument the other day with a guy that that we couldn't move fast enough. And I had an M3 server up SSH in 27 seconds. I said, is that fast enough? He's like, yeah, I guess that's yeah, damn right it's fast enough. Like that's retarded to say that it's not fast enough. And that's my point. But I think that the mindset that you bring, kind of how do you measure the success of the business, depends on the industry or it depends on what you're trying to do. There was a point somewhere in there. But your whole, they work. I have one product that runs 10,000 SQL databases. That's one of 1,000. How am I going to take 10,000 SQL databases in the cloud? You know, if that's a whiteboard session, that's probably half a day.
You should put Chaos Monkey on that.
Something. Just, you know, but that's the type of stuff that you get yourself involved in because that's what the decision was at the time. You know, I chose Mongo, but it requires, you know, I have Mongo on one product. It requires 300 gigabytes of RAM to run because that's the way it was built. You know, it should have been built like Cassandra, like period. And so you have to have, you know, in the enterprise space, you have to have a talented team at the top. You have to have a talented team at the bottom. But unfortunately, there's a real middle layer of people who are either hardworking but not talented, or not in the technology field. So, yeah, you mentioned medicine. You know, my hardest part is, you know, Dave and I go into HR and try to explain how come Chef is different than Puppet on a resume. Well, they're both configuration management. Yeah, great, you read that too. That's great. You know, but HR doesn't get it. You know, and folks don't get it. And when you move as fast as we do, as technologists do, I honestly think that it is an immaturity of the tools. It's a lot of startups. It's a lot of guys who are arguing, well, the Rango database is a great database. Wonderful. Node4j is a great product too. But they haven't been tested at 5 million users in the enterprise yet. So I can't, it's not like the old days where nobody loses their job because you choose IBM.
Yeah.
You will lose your job if you decide to push everybody down into this product, and then the product can't scale to where I need it to go. So that's why you choose things like Amazon, because they're putting up $7 billion worth in Amazon.com 2007 infrastructure every day. And large organizations, I ran Pega Cloud for 3 years. Pega Systems deals with huge, when you fly through London, it's all run by Pega System. So those are the types of things that you can do with Amazon. So that's why we choose Amazon, right? But the smaller, kind of more, what stack do you want? I have Scott and SmartShift and I just had a meeting today, 50 stacks in the pipeline right now to build on, shit that I haven't heard of ever as an executive. But, that's what the guys want. So, and, it's about just sometimes proving that there's an actual business case behind it, because that's going to get you the budget, that's going to get you the dollars, that'll get you the people. But defining DevOps, that slide where you had DevOps on the right, you have the other folks on the left. Find a way in your resume or find a way in your career path to still tell the story of what you did for the last 10 years before there was such a thing as DevOps. And as a hiring manager, have tolerance for the guy who says, I've been using AWS in my basement and I run my entire house on Linux, and I'm a hobbyist, but my company hasn't let me do that. Because in the enterprise, we're really trapped in these silos where a network guy maybe is the only guy who got to touch something that the development team never got to touch, but the guy runs the most magnificent, elegant thing you've ever seen in his basement. So, that's where we are at the enterprise level. The hiring is a hard part because it is. You got to sometimes say, well, I just need a guy who can do Memcache. Oh, that's boring, but that's what we need right now. So we'll get a Memcache guy, and then I'll move to Elasticache, and hopefully he can learn Elasticache. And so, it's one of those things. Yeah, he'll figure it out, right? Yeah, it's a challenge. The immaturity is a challenge on both ends.
I think to the original question, I think it could be, in terms of measuring success or not, it could be as simple as how many times in stand-up, someone says, what the fuck, you didn't tell me that you were doing that. That's a measure of failure in a DevOps organization.
Yeah.
Like the number of times where, something gets to, be deployed to any environment, whether it's dev, QA, UAT, production, whatever else, and someone says, oh shit, well this doesn't work because such and such wasn't, configured on here, that's a failure of, your DevOps organization. There's no metric for
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, success with DevOps is not a universal measure. It really depends where you are on the continuum, right? At one end, everyone is the ultimate goal is continuous operation, continuous deployment. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the dev team who hates the ops team. No one speaks to each other, and it takes 12 weeks to stand up, a VM. So success could be, I've got the dev team collaborating with the ops team, as
Right,
you
exactly.
point out. They're participating now in the stand-up, or there's less misunderstanding. So you have to pick your wins. And depending upon where you are, because it is a progression, and there are very, very few companies that are sitting at, at the ultimate goal of, continuous operation.
I mean, so Dave and I, that's the point you made in your slide deck, is we're working on kind of what is that standard. Get out of the technical measurements, figure out a way to present yourself in a way that shows that you're a good team member, you're a good citizen. I focus much more on people who I can sit down and have a half an hour conversation and I don't want to hang up on you. I always ask my recruiters to hand them over to me first, and they're like, well, that's a little odd, they're going to talk to the executive first. Yeah, because if I don't want to hang up on you in half an hour, I probably won't want to shoot you in a stand-up meeting that I happen to join just out of random. And your team probably won't want to kill you either. So, that's why we use customer satisfaction as a big metric in our DevOps.
Right.
Or and I say in our DevOps, we're so early on that it's hard to say that we actually are doing DevOps today. It's like, but the idea that, your whole, somebody doesn't say F you in a stand-up, I think that kind of conflict has a place in innovation. You need to challenge each other deeply and be passionate, so I get that.
Sure.
But at the same time, if I come back and say 9 out of 10 developers on your team want you put out to traffic, then shame on me once. If I come back around and that metric is, again, you're in the red, then you're not the right fit. It doesn't mean you're not the right fit for that dev team. you also have problems in the enterprise where you have 300 engineers that are all working on the same branch. I had for TUSA 10,000 people working on one thing. It's like, how do you, great Amazon, you got the 2 pizzas in a box. I have to buy an entire freaking whale to feed, So, I don't know how, for my DevOps teams, it has to be all around customer satisfaction. And your development team has to be your customer. And eventually developers will get that they can do this. But it's access and privilege. And, get out of the technical metrics. Figure out how to be a good citizen and don't be an asshole. That's pretty much how it works.
Okay. For these next 2 topics, I'll give you a minute each, so we have some time. Okay. For you, what are the values that you think are important to your DevOps organization? What are the values that are going to help you keep your employees, help you deliver on your goals?
All right, minute. I'll take less. You are now the custodian or the keeper of a service. The changing of definition of done is a huge part of everything that we do. So you're not done when the code gets built. You're not done when the code gets shipped. You're not done when you go home at 5 o'clock. Your availability to your team and your product's availability, if it's off, then you're done. But as a service, you're always on. So if you operations as a service instead of using DevOps, you and I disagreed on this at lunch, and I promised I wouldn't be a real bastard about it at the panel. But I don't like DevOps, period. Like, it just doesn't fit well with me because developers get confused, operations people get confused. It's a marriage that doesn't seem oil and water to work really well. So changing the brand to something like operations as a service or ticketless IT or something like that. As a name, yeah, no, none of you. You're all great. That's important to me to be branded in the organization as someone who's So if you think of yourself as an operations service champion, and in that sense of the word, services are not off unless they're you're not done unless you're turned off. So that really turns it into a different mindset completely.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the biggest value that you can bring to the table, one, is collaboration. Right, just promoting collaboration, which really is it's transformational in nature too, and focusing on service. So from the standpoint, if you can get your teams to be able to focus on a common goal, right? A common goal, as Jason mentioned, whether that's the customer, the service to the customer, and I think that would be about it.
I don't have too much to add on this comment, but I did want to use my minute to kind of rebuttal yours. I only have like 45 seconds. No, I actually kind of agree with you, but I think a lot of it is again the enterprise versus startup mindset. I think with the enterprise stuff, you have sort of still that 3-layer tier where you have infrastructure and then platform and then software. And so your infrastructure and your platform guys are providing as a service to your software, to your developers, who are then providing your software to your end users. Whereas in like a more of a non-enterprise type environment, it's kind of a mix and match scenario. So I agree, like DevOps in most enterprise organizations where it's like, it's really hard for the developers, and I've seen this in larger companies, to kind of like service back to the operations people because they don't have the control. There's so much regulation, there's so much like security and things like that. So you do have to have that stack, and therefore you do have to have the operations as a service to the software developer. So I'm actually like, I know you guys fought at lunch, but I'm just thinking you both have valid points. And as far as like what DevOps means to like, I don't even know what the question was. I didn't really have anything to add to this.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. So, empathy, communication, and continuous learning. You have to empathize with the other teams that you're working with. Everyone's got technical debt and other baggage that they're carrying around. Work with those people. Make sure you communicate. Otherwise, the shit's just gonna fall apart. And if you're not learning, your organization isn't going to evolve and succeed.
I guess in my organization, what I anyway am trying to achieve is just getting much more streamlined flow and process, because right now there's just a lot of dysfunction, a lot of broken communication, so just trying to get everything more more streamlined and get to a point where we can actually have a better flow from requirement through to delivery, rather than having to get everything bunched up at the different nexus points, having sort of shaky handoffs.
Sense. Okay, last question. 1 minute still. What is the biggest DevOps disaster that you have been a part of? How did you get through it?
I guess I'll take that
Yeah,
one.
go this way.
So most recently, I'm sure it's going to sound minuscule in terms of scale at everybody else, but so we're scheduled for our release, which, as I've mentioned before, is on about a 2.5 month cycle this coming week, and we're trying to get a candidate build to our QA team last Tuesday, and Monday evening our build server died. It was running Ubuntu 10.10, completely locked up, not responsive, couldn't even reboot it in AWS console, and it was not puppetized. We didn't have an AMI image of it, and it was also being slated for retirement by AWS very shortly. So fortunately, one of the other developers had been playing around with building up a new Jenkins server, and so we used the foundation work he had done there to be able to manually craft a new server that we could actually use for generating our build and getting it deployed to test and staging. But it took basically 2.5 of us an entire day's worth of work to get it back up to par.
So that actually reminds me of something that happened very recently. Site all of a sudden, well, find out about a site that we built for a Fortune 500 client. Find out that the site is down, first off, and what was meant by, and I actually tweeted about this, like, let's start defining, the site is down versus the site is not rendering as expected. So that all the CSS for the site's gone, and it's been hosted on a third-party domain. This is all stuff that I'm just discovering, and the DNS or the registration for this domain is expired. Go to hit the technical contact, who of course is on vacation, right? Because that's always when this shit happens. So going through all these different iterations, okay, well, we should be able to quickly take, we'll pull the code out of source control and we'll just deploy it to S3 and make some small little updates, and bang, we'll be back in business. Oh wait, the code isn't in source control. So so ultimately I get to the point where I'm like, all right, well, this tiny little site that needs to be backed up because it's for a very important client, I'm going to go fetch it from the Wayback Machine and start restoring it from the Wayback Machine. And as I'm like 99% through this, someone's like, oh yeah, in Dropbox, here's this zip of all of the code for this, followed by, oh, we finally got in and we're able to re-register the domain, and thankfully, they hadn't destroyed the hosting for it yet, so we're back in business. And the following day, no one seemed to have noticed that the site was back up and running again.
I think a key point of DevOps is to humble developers and cascading failures.
Well, again, that's actually a question I'd like to ask after this. How many developers here, carry a pager?
So I guess this goes back to sort of manual setup versus sort of modern DevOps, where everybody has monitoring and backups as their number one priority, right? So that they never. One scenario was just back in like 2009. It was like the whole, let me spin up manual instances in EC2 and attach EBS volumes, and it was a database that wasn't replicated. EBS volumes crapped out, lost everything, and I just happened to take a MySQL dump the night before, and it was sitting in my home directory on some other server, and restored it. I also do have one funny story, which is I was working for a telecommunications company, pretty big, long time ago, and it's not listed anywhere, so I'd gladly share this. And they had like a similar situation, and it was like, oh, somebody happened to have the billing database in their own directory. You know, a lot of that stuff happens. There always seems to be something there, but to that point, you know, a recommendation is that like the biggest part of DevOps is, you know, monitoring and backup should almost always be number one, and then everything else is like, okay, we've got that in place, let's move fast. And my anxiety post talks about that. So that's
rollback should be just as easy as deploying. Right?
Well, I think I'll have to go back probably about four plus years when I was working with a client and moving a production system up to AWS, and would have been doing, you know, moving snippets of the database to do the test, and we're positioned to do our final acceptance test on a Monday, and my job was to move the production database up to AWS before I left on Friday. And if I did a normal job, I'll just sit down and, you know, kick it off. And I did the wet, you know, did the dump of the database. I said, boy, that's a freaking big database. Did the one SCP, and it came back and told me it was going to take 2 days and 16 hours, you know, for the transfer. So keep in mind, if you have to move large, heavy objects, you need to understand how big they are and how long it's going to take.
That's awesome.
I can plan that team. We just 2 months ago, we finished kind of the first big 400 instance platform. People were excited. We built it. It was all shut down. We shut up just a little bit. Said we're successful. Everyone started to pop champagne, and I said, well, why don't you run the Jenkins and see what happens when you load? And you know, 8 gigabytes in a network, alarms and network shutdown, and all sorts of shit falling down around our heads later. And I said, okay, so I'll come back tomorrow when you guys have figured that one out. But same thing, you know, if you're going to build the whole stack in your Jenkins, make sure that you can transfer from ground to cloud, you know, or put Jenkins in the cloud, and then it's much simpler. So, yeah, make sure you check every box before you call it done.
Yeah. Follow up. A couple jobs ago, I was put in charge of previously all of our development and infrastructure was managed by a vendor. We decided to bring it all in-house, and we had to rewrite everything from scratch because they didn't want to give us any of the code because our contract with them was bizarre. But so I was tasked with designing our architecture and implementing it, and so fairly, you know, somewhat along in that process, we were using Postgres in a master-slave configuration, and I took a dump of the production server. It was still fairly small, but we were doing something on the order of about 1,000 or 2,000 transactions a second. Pulled the dump of the production server, intended to restore it to staging, and restored it to production instead. And about halfway through, realized, oh shit, now I have to let it finish. And then the next day, realized, oh shit, I didn't remember to reset the indexes to the proper value, so now I'm getting write conflicts. And yeah, that was fun. Our client was not happy. Fortunately, it was early enough on in the process that we could kind of chalk it off as an oopsie.
Okay, any questions for the panel?
Yeah. So this is an interesting discussion, and I think there's been several references to DevOps being complex and all that. I think Agile suffered from still does to some degree some from the same notion. There's plenty of shops out there who think they're Agile. But I was interested in the contrast between enterprise and startup, but there's a middle ground there. There's the big startup. You know, we're still doing all the startup methodology and everything else. And I was interested, and I can understand this having worked in enterprise long before DevOps was doing the work. The question of operations as a service, I've used that myself to encompass what DevOps to me actually represents, which is knocking down walls. You know, knocking down walls, knocking down resentments between the development team and the operations team. I think what's being talked about today is a little step further than that, but I'm detecting a somewhat one-sided, not necessarily from the part, but a one-sided look at it from the standpoint of, you know, how does operations behave like developers? You know, how do we make infrastructure as code? All these things. one of the things I'm tackling where I am at DataZoo is that there's a conception in development, or in development management, I should say, because development, there's a close relationship between developers and system engineers, but in development management, there is a conception of operations as a service. So it's like, we'll collaborate with operations, we'll have an operations liaison in our chapter meeting, and we'll assign all the tickets that we need doing to those people, and they can go off and make sure that operations does them. And what I've been raising is, look, what's the concept, and this is the question for the panel, what's the conception of, to me, DevOps or no DevOps, systems engineering is a specific skill within an engineering organization. Systems engineers think about the whole picture, engineers by design are very focused on whatever features they have to be asked to implement. You need the systems engineering skills, sometimes going back 30 years, myself, where you've seen the production blowups, you've seen the disasters, you know that when you drop a new component into an existing environment, chances are it's going to blow up unless you take that into account. And so what I'm arguing for in DataZoo with varying degrees of success is, okay, where does DevOps fit in terms of architecture? Where are you, where at the beginning of a project are we calling in systems engineers and software engineers together under the same architecture infrastructure and say, what's the components of this? Because I think if we can get the DevOps from the ground up, that will make everyone's life a lot easier. And I think that probably applies. I think that probably applies more in startups because you're rolling out more products and stuff. But certainly in enterprise, when you're faced with re-architecture solutions, when you're faced with going from MySQL to Cassandra because you realise it was the right thing to do in the first place, and you can't continue the way you do it, then that's when you really need to get together. Okay, how do you build a multi-data center Cassandra infrastructure? Systems engineers know a hell of a lot more about that than the guys writing the Cassandra queries.
Yeah. I would first agree. I think the logistics of the vision of how you become customer focused, how automation first, how you get to don't become a dependable delivery person, all starts with an idea that you're at the bottom of that hill, and so you have to be in the requirements gathering session from the beginning. I like to say that there's whether I'm joking or not about the hybrid, whether I'm joking or not about selling the data center in under 5 years, from a corporate perspective, there's always going to be a data security concern, and you see plenty of companies shutter their doors because of data breach, right? Especially in Massachusetts. I think your operations people absolutely have to, and your engineers and your most focused individuals have to ensure that integrity of that shield around your data is protected, and sometimes that means not giving all access that you possibly could to the development teams. But the second group, to the layered approach, as you said, there's operations, platform, application. That platform team is the one that's traditionally, at least in our organization, has been labeled for many years as DevOps, and are those guys who just get Jira board hell. It's just blam, and you're just, shit, 100 boards, in a day, and I have to go figure out how to get all that done. And not given dates, not given firm requirements, so I got to go back and track what they actually asked for and when they actually need it. And it takes 6 weeks to get that delivered, and so it's not going to fit in. I think the big difference is you take those three teams, the infrastructure, the platform, and the application, and you have to find a way to push those platform people up a notch. So your operational people, your engineers, have to learn how to work with developers. They have to learn to play together. So it really is immature sometimes. You have to, what's a right requirement? What's an actual requirement? Operations first with the development mindset helps. Right? So they both come to a middle ground, and I think that the requirements gathering stage is the right place to logistically push those forces into a row. Because if you can't get to the end of the user story meeting, then the project's screwed. That's just the way it is.
And I'm in a bit of a strange organization because at an agency, and we're building stuff for big stodgy old clients who are slow moving, and part of the reason why they come to us is to do things faster. But what that means is that I may be in an organization that only 600 or 700 people, but there's a sort of, as I refer to it, a startup every 6 weeks as we're launching new projects. But to your point, I'm a systems engineer. I'm involved at the very beginning, when the project kicks off to, architect the solution along with the software engineers. So you start from a place of, alignment, and that really helps tremendously throughout the life cycle of a project. And one of the things that myself and my colleague had done when we came in was sort of, draw people a sort of inverse bell graph of what, our time involvement would be on a given project. So lots of time at the beginning while we're doing architecture, spinning things up, sort of tapers off in the middle where we continue to be involved, and a lot of it's just, oversight, hand-holding, firefighting, problem solving, and then as we get, towards the end, we're like the, I guess the final third of the project, that involvement ramps up is normally, that's when production environments and clients are finally, available because they're in a very waterfall, like, well, we need to wait for someone to rack this, and we need to wait for someone to cable it. So our involvement, then spikes at the end. So I think setting those expectations, but also being involved at the very beginning, will help, ensure that there's alignment and communication throughout the project.
I think a lot of it depends on, first of all, anytime there's an organization where you can't do everything from that corner. So if there's still, a part of the organization that's physically moving servers or physically racking things in data centers, like, it's really hard to combine those types of teams. But if you've got everybody, whether it's your infrastructure, your platform, or your developers working on their software, and they can all do their job from that corner, that means they're kind of starting on the same level playing field, and you're not blocked by the technology that they're using to do their job. But I think a lot of it also has to do with again, requirements around security and things like that, because I know, I come from an infrastructure systems engineering background. 10 years ago, I was manually installing operating systems I was using like FreeBSD because it was the cool thing to do, and like setting up everything manually. And it's like nowadays, there's engineers I work with who have no idea what apt or yum is, but yet still run a chef recipe that gets the server up and running for them. And you know what? A lot of power to them. It keeps them moving fast. It keeps them moving quick. And again, it's like when things go wrong, maybe I use my system skills to kind of debug things, but depending on how disposable the application stack is, I might just blow the instance away and spin up a new one. So again, I think it really depends on on if that, like, what the risk is, and if that kind of disposal infrastructure is possible for you, because if it is, you can reiterate on your stack over time. And so you don't necessarily have to plan things out from the beginning. Just as like with code, if you push a feature and your customers don't like it, or you want to retract it or edit it or change it over time, you can. And I think, if you have infrastructure where you're deploying a database, or you're deploying, that's a scary example, but you're deploying something else that you can easily refactor over time, you don't necessarily have to plan as far ahead. But an organization like yourself, like you were mentioning, that middle layer, I do think you do have to have that sort of architecture type meeting, and I kind of agree with what you said, is having the platform team kind of move up a little bit and kind of live with the software engineers a little more, and that really only applies when you have that 3-level tier.
Just one of the popular sayings I've heard is, a new startup has the luxury of not having any customers.
Yeah.
But a funded startup already has customers.
Yeah.
Which means you can hire.
Sort of somewhat off on a tangent, but I think ties in with this well is I think one thing too that affects that relationship of systems engineers sitting with the developers to sort of really architect out how things are going to look is the somewhat recent movement of TDD, where a lot of that application architecture hasn't actually been fully planned yet, so they sort of let it evolve. So from that mindset, it makes it difficult to really sit down with the systems engineering team to say, this is what we actually need, because in some cases, depending on how they're doing the development, they may not even know what they need yet. Yeah. So that adds some complexity and difficulty.
But I would argue that sometimes the systems engineer can tell them.
Right.
That's the conception
I'm totally with you. I definitely think that the systems engineer should have a big, at least a significant role in determining how the application will look in the end. But just that from a developer perspective, a lot of times they may say, oh, I have no idea. I'm just going to sort of let the tests guide me to where I want to end up.
And that was going to add to that is that, we all know that today's software is king. It watches itself, it fixes servers, it does everything, right? But it doesn't mean that the developer is a good developer.
Yes.
So, you have
Developers
to,
not
you
always
have
the
to,
smartest person.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, your developing teams need to be mature enough to understand how to write an application the right way. If you really truly want to get down to, I'm a business managed application. I go for the lowest cost stuff all the time. I drive my self-healing. I can blow myself up. That all requires a really mature development team. And honestly, I don't know many. I mean, there's big companies who tout that they have it, but you know what? It's probably 5 or 6 guys in the company, and the rest of them are all just doing what the 5 or 6 guys tell them to do. So.
Yeah, we don't need Chaos Monkey, we have lead developers.
That's awesome. That's very cool.
I think depending on your organization too, I think you can get a lot of benefit out of cycling people through teams because
Yes.
Yeah,
Uh,
definitely.
developers can probably learn a lot from systems engineers if they sit in their team for a week or two. And if you're doing infrastructure as code and all of this, I mean the developers could be teaching the system engineers how to do test driven development. What's the difference between a unit and integration test? How do I mock things out? I think there's a lot of back and forth there where both people can learn a lot.
Absolutely.
By the way, going on your comment, what you said, just to add to that, it's also important, like being a good developer is also knowing when not necessarily putting all that time and effort into full like self-healing is important, because I know some developers that are good and they'll purposely, I don't want to say write crappy code, but you know what I mean, they'll purposely, kind of hack something together because they know it's the right thing to do for that specific moment. So like, I think what you said was good. I just
I saw a great quote a little while ago. It said, "An insufficiently ugly hack will end up becoming permanent."
Yep. It's nothing so permanent.
Right after the guy who wrote it leaves.
Yeah.
Okay. Question?
So I have a question, like more on the technical side about databases, because obviously it's great when you just have stateless, business logic, whatever. Those things handle themselves nicely. You can just shoot the instance in the head. Who cares? I know you don't like the word best practices, but is there any provenly reliable way to make scalable, relatively self-healing databases, and do that with any degree of reliability?
what kind
I
of
don't know.
databases?
Yeah, really.
If we want to be here for another 2 hours,
Yeah.
we can get it.
Good topic for the next meetup.
Yeah.
I'll ask people to post on the meetup group articles that they've read about that.
But
Okay.
in short, having good failover, high availability, whatever that may mean for your particular situation.
but not overcomplicating the setup so much that the high availability ends up taking your database down.
Yes, very much so.
Or sometimes you just drink the Kool-Aid and use Amazon Redshift or whatever.
Right. Or their RDS.
Dynamo.
Just throw your data in flat.
Anything else? Any other questions? Okay.
We
thank
draw
you.
the, let's draw the.
Yeah.
Guys,
Let's
get
get
some
you
last
on
one.
with it. Everybody else look for their name and now's the time.
Yeah.
I have 4:30 a.m. every day now. Gotta take my run, do my bike, do everything I do. Have my alone time for 5 hours before I actually show up the office.
Too late. I figured I'd come back. It's interesting to hear other perspectives.
Seriously. You're taking pizza right here.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah, it's very system. Yeah. But yeah, no, it was interesting.
Guys, take
It's
pizza.
really
Like, seriously, take it.
DevOps.
All in?
DevOps.
Yeah.
For it. It's,
Congratulations, Mick England.
Yay! Data zoo! Hey, you shoot the
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I've been doing congratulations for a while, so it seems like especially now there's so many like I took this presentation of Docker, one part is one other thing. So I would like to go to all of these things. Oh, absolutely.
They had this new idea. I have
It's really not. No, I swear. I'm on route.
correct it, risking to an accident, or just send it and risk it. Show you that you don't know.
Yes,
No, that's a good first statement. But if you ever have any questions or anything,
Yeah, that's right. Thanks.
Hey, thank you all.